In December 2022, during the final of the 2022 FIFA World Cup final, something extraordinary happened. Over 1.5 billion people watched a single football match. Behind that game, billions in sponsorship money, billions in broadcasting rights, billions in advertising revenue. Over the full tournament, more than 5 billion people watched. One simple sport had become one of the largest economic machines on Earth. But football didn't start as a billion-dollar industry. It started with factory workers kicking a ball in muddy fields in 19th century England. So how did a simple street game become a $600 billion global empire? To understand that, we have to go back more than 150 years. In the early 1800s, football barely resembled the game we know today. Across towns in England, entire communities played violent matches known as mob football. Hundreds of people would chase a ball through streets, fields, and rivers. There were no referees, no fixed number of players, no time limits. Games could last for hours, sometimes even days. But the Industrial Revolution was reshaping Britain. Millions of workers were moving into dense cities like Manchester, Sheffield, and Birmingham. Factory life was brutal. 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week. But on Saturday afternoons, something unusual began to happen. Workers gathered in open fields, and they played football. Railway workers formed teams. Factory employees created clubs. In 1857, the world's oldest football club was founded, Sheffield FC. At the time, nobody imagined football would become a global industry. It was simply recreation. But wherever large crowds gather consistently, markets eventually appear. And soon, someone would discover how to turn football into a business. On October 26, 1863, representatives from 12 clubs gathered in London at the Freemasons' Tavern. Their goal was simple: create universal rules for football. The meeting created the Football Association. For the first time, the sport had standardized rules. Matches now had 11 players per team, fixed goals, defined boundaries. At first, it seemed like a small administrative decision, but economically, it was revolutionary. Because standardization makes something scalable, and scalable systems attract investment. Within a few decades, football would evolve from a casual pastime into a structured competition. But the real turning point came from an idea proposed by a Scottish businessman in 1888. An idea that would quietly invent the modern sports industry. In 1888, William McGregor, a director of Aston Villa, had an idea. He wrote letters to leading clubs across England. His proposal was simple: create a league. Teams would play each other every season on a fixed schedule. That year, the Football League was born. 12 clubs joined the competition, including Everton FC, Blackburn Rovers, Preston North End. For the first time, football had predictable matches, predictable crowds, predictable revenue. Fans paid roughly 6p per match. It seems small today, but when thousands attended weekly games, something powerful emerged. Football had accidentally invented recurring entertainment revenue. And that predictable income would soon finance something much bigger. Massive stadiums, structures so large they could transform entire city economies. By the early 1900s, football's popularity had exploded across Europe. Clubs began investing in massive stadiums, structures capable of holding tens of thousands of fans. Among them were Old Trafford, opened in 1910, Highbury Stadium, opened in 1913, and later San Siro Stadium, opened in 1926. These were not just sports venues, they were economic machines. On match days, entire neighborhoods transformed. Pubs filled, trains overflowed, street vendors lined the roads. A single club could drive millions in local commerce every season. Cities began realizing something extraordinary. Football wasn't just entertainment, it was infrastructure. But the sport was still largely local. English teams had English fans. Spanish clubs had Spanish supporters. Football had not yet become global. That would change in 1904, when 7 nations gathered in Paris and created the organization that would control football forever. On May 21, 1904, representatives from 7 European nations met in Paris. Their goal was simple: organize international football. The organization they created was called FIFA. Its first president was Robert Guérin. At first, FIFA seemed like a small administrative body, but it would eventually become one of the most powerful organizations in global sport. Because FIFA had a much bigger vision: a global tournament. One competition where nations could compete for football supremacy. A tournament that would eventually capture the attention of the entire planet. The World Cup. But when the first tournament began in 1930, almost nobody realized what it would eventually become. The first FIFA World Cup was held in Montevideo, Uruguay in 1930. Only 13 teams participated. European teams traveled across the Atlantic by ship. The host nation built a massive stadium called Estadio Centenario. Capacity: 90,000 people. Uruguay defeated Argentina in the final. Financially, the tournament generated little revenue, but it created something far more valuable: a global narrative. Every 4 years, the world would gather to watch football's greatest competition. But the real financial explosion wouldn't arrive until a new technology entered the sport: television. And when television arrived, football's economic model would change forever. The 1970 FIFA World Cup changed football forever. It was the first World Cup broadcast globally in color television. Millions watched as Pelé led Brazil to victory. For the first time, the audience was not limited by stadium size. Millions could watch from home. And television networks quickly realized something: football was perfect broadcast content. Unpredictable, emotional, global. Broadcast rights would soon become the most valuable asset in sports. But the biggest television revolution would arrive 2 decades later, in England. In 1992, when a group of clubs decided to change football's financial structure forever. By the late 1980s, football in England was in trouble. Stadiums were deteriorating. Violence among hooligan groups had damaged the sport's reputation. And financially, many clubs were struggling. But behind the scenes, something important was happening. Television companies were realizing football had enormous potential. One broadcaster in particular saw the opportunity: Sky Group. In 1992, the biggest English clubs made a radical decision. They left the traditional league system and formed a new competition, the Premier League. Sky paid £304 million for the broadcasting rights. At the time, it seemed like an absurd amount of money. But that deal changed everything. Because television didn't just broadcast football. It transformed it into a global entertainment product. Suddenly, a match played in Manchester could be watched in Lagos, Tokyo, or New York. And once football became global, something unexpected happened. Investors started paying attention. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, football clubs began realizing something extraordinary. Their fan base was no longer local. It was global. Clubs like Manchester United began aggressively expanding their international presence. Pre-season tours across Asia, official merchandise stores worldwide, television partnerships across continents. By 2007, Manchester United estimated it had over 333 million fans globally. Meanwhile, in Spain, Real Madrid CF launched the famous Galacticos strategy, signing global superstars like David Beckham, Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo Nazario. These signings were not just sporting decisions, they were marketing strategies, because star players attract global attention, and attention attracts sponsors. But soon, football clubs would attract something even bigger: billionaire investors. In 2003, Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich purchased Chelsea FC for approximately £140 million. But buying the club was only the beginning. Abramovich spent more than £1 billion on players, facilities, and infrastructure. Within a few years, Chelsea had become one of the most powerful clubs in Europe. Other wealthy investors took notice. In 2008, the Abu Dhabi royal family, led by Sheikh Mansour, acquired Manchester City. Billions were invested. State-of-the-art training facilities, world-class players, elite coaches. Within a decade, Manchester City became one of the most dominant teams in Europe. But these investments were not always about profit. Sometimes, football served another purpose: global influence.
This is a new era for Chelsea Football Club. Together, we will reach the very top.
Behind the spectacle of football lies one of the most fascinating financial systems in sports: the transfer market. Players are bought and sold between clubs. Young talent is developed in academies. And when a player becomes exceptional, their value skyrockets. For decades, transfer records climbed steadily. But in 2017, the market exploded. Paris Saint-Germain paid €222 million to sign Neymar, the largest transfer fee in sports history. The deal shocked the world, but it also revealed something important. Football had become a financial marketplace where elite talent could be worth hundreds of millions. Yet even that number would soon look small compared to the scale of money flowing through football's biggest event, the World Cup. The FIFA World Cup is the most watched sporting event on Earth. Every 4 years, billions of people tune in. But hosting the tournament has become a massive national investment. When Qatar hosted the 2022 World Cup, it reportedly spent over $200 billion on infrastructure. New stadiums, new rail systems, new airports. Entire cities were redesigned. For Qatar, the tournament was more than sport. It was global branding. Football had become a tool of international influence. But despite the billions flowing through the sport, football clubs themselves were often financially fragile, and that fragility would soon be exposed.
And in 2022, the world champions are Argentina.
Despite enormous revenues, many football clubs operate on fragile finances. Player wages often consume 60 to 70% of club revenue. Clubs depend heavily on qualifying for major competitions, like the UEFA Champions League. Then, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Stadiums closed. Matchday revenue disappeared. Broadcast contracts were renegotiated. Even giants struggled. FC Barcelona reported debts exceeding 1.3 billion euros. The pandemic exposed a surprising truth. Football was powerful, but also highly leveraged, which raised an interesting question. If football isn't financially stable, why does it remain the most dominant sport in the world? The answer lies not in money, but in psychology. The real product of football is not the match itself. It is attention. Football taps into something deeply human: identity, community, tribal loyalty. A supporter may follow the same club for 50 years. Parents pass that loyalty to their children. Fans watch even when their team is losing. They buy merchandise year after year. Few industries in the world enjoy that level of loyalty, which is why the global football economy now exceeds $600 billion annually. Clubs operate like multinational corporations. Players are global brands. Governments compete to host tournaments, and media companies battle for broadcasting rights. Yet on the surface, the product remains astonishingly simple. 22 players, one ball, 90 minutes. Football didn't conquer the world because it was the best sport. It conquered the world because it mastered something far more valuable: human attention. And as long as billions of people continue watching, the business of football will keep growing. If this changed how you see money, subscribe. These documentaries are built for thinkers, not spectators.